Moin, Servus, and welcome to the channel, guys. 1 year, 26,000 kilometers, or approximately 16,000 miles. I think it's a good time to give you a review and my opinions of this bike. And if you're interested in that, then stay tuned. So what will we discuss in this video? We will have a look at the pros that I see in this bike, the positive things, which are quite a lot, and the main reason why I have the bike in the first place, I guess. But no bike comes without downsides, right? So we will definitely address those downsides and see whether they are a deal breaker for any of you. For me, currently, they are not, but there are definitely downsides. And towards the end of the video, I will also address some of the modifications that I have on the bike. As you can probably see, there's quite some stuff on the bike which is not standard, and why I've chosen to use those and what I think about them quickly. So that would be at the end of the video. But let's start with the positive things and what I really like about the bike, and I would like to start with that engine. This engine for me is something incredible. I don't know which other word I'm supposed to use. Why is that? This engine has, I would call it, 3 souls in it, for a lack of better explanation. Because on one side, you can absolutely push this engine if you want to. You can have a lot of fun with it on the road. It is willing to rev. It delivers even more power and an additional boost once you exceed roughly 6,000 RPM. So it is in a certain way similar to some 3-cylinders, maybe 4-cylinder engines. Not that it is generally, of course, but it delivers a similar kind of punch up high in the revs. Then at the same time, though, if you don't want to ride it hard and you just say, hey, I have a relaxed, easy day in the office chair, then the bike can absolutely do that as well. If you just switch it over from dynamic into road mode, and it just becomes the most relaxed cruiser that you could think of. And last but not least, if I take this bike and I ride it off-road, and yes, I know everybody has a different opinion on what is off-road and so on. For me, off-road, as I've just done on the ACT in Italy, then this engine kind of refuses to stall. It just tractors through everything. That's why I like to call it sometimes my little tractor. For some, it might not be a good thing. For me, it absolutely is, because I really like that almost incapability to stall and being able to ride even very low in the RPMs. So this engine definitely is one of the highlights and probably also one of the reasons why this bike is so good at everything as it is. That brings us right away to the second pro in my list, and that is the suspension. Like the engine, it has quite a lot of adjustability, even more so actually than the engine. The engine knows a couple of different modes, of course, and therefore throttle mappings, but on the suspension you can go that one step further, because you can adjust the damping of the suspension in the different modes, such as in the dynamic, the road, and of course also in enduro mode. And that transforms this bike even more and makes it even better at being good at everything. When I want to attack some corners and I have the suspension in its dynamic mode, I also have it as at the highest damping setting, so stiffest suspension. I never feel like I miss anything from the suspension. I don't think that I would need a stiffer suspension, harder suspension, a more precise suspension for my style of riding, of course. I am not a Valentino Rossi or anything like that. I'm just a regular guy riding on the street. And when I set this suspension onto dynamic with high damping setting, I feel much more confidence attacking corners, even if the surface is not perfect, because I always feel like the suspension is doing its best at keeping contact with the tarmac to never lose contact between the tire and the tarmac, and therefore the maximum grip that is available. On the other hand, if I switch the bike into its road suspension mode, here I am actually running on the lowest damping setting, so it's a very relaxed and smooth ride. I think it absolutely rivals a 1250, for example, in the suspension mode. It is this so-called magic carpet 100%. If there are big potholes in the street or whatever there might be, it really does a great job at balancing those out and just running smoothly over any kind of terrain. And then, of course, you do have the additional benefit with the Enduro mode, and you can set the suspension into Enduro. Here, though, I have to absolutely say, since I'm an off-road beginner and I'm not that experienced on riding off-road, I haven't played around too much with the suspension there, as I am not yet skilled enough to notice a significant difference in the different settings on the suspension. Here I definitely still need some more miles in the off-road section to really figure out what different suspension settings do to the bike, but that probably comes eventually, right? And then another positive thing, since we are down here already, and that is probably the only part on this bike that I decided for because of looks, but not only because of looks, are those forged wheels. I do think they look way better than the spoked wheels, and they by far look better than those cast wheels. And from the off-road riding that I have done so far, they didn't see any damage. They didn't get damaged. They are not bent. There's nothing on them. They are not really scratched or whatsoever from the off-road riding. And that's the second reason why I decided for them, besides that I think they look a little better than the spoke wheels. They are much easier to clean because you do not need to get in between all the small spokes and somehow try to clean it. And you also don't really need to do any maintenance on them, right? Because you do not need to retighten the spokes or whatsoever. That's a give or take thing. I mean, if you decide for the spoked wheels, then you know you have to do that. But here, I'm absolutely happy with these. And yes, you heard me correctly. The only thing that mattered to me in terms of visuals, because generally I don't care about visuals on a bike. The styling, whatever you want to call it, for me, a bike is first of all one thing, or let's say two things. It's a piece of metal and plastic onto wheels. And the only thing that really matters to me is how does it ride? What do I feel? What are the, let's call it emotions and the experiences that I have here, right here, riding the bike. And I would say, similar to what I've just said on the engine, this bike is incredible at the diversity it can deliver. On this just recently driven ACT in Italy, you're jumping between on-road riding and off-road riding slash gravel riding, whatever you want to call it. And you are riding in some, for me at least, very challenging off-road conditions, up a steep incline or downhill, relatively steep, constantly balancing the bike to make sure that you're not falling over. And then the next second you are on the street and you have so much fun through those twisties, into lean angle, accelerating, just enjoying a very nice twisty road. I mean, I haven't ridden that many bikes in my life, admittedly, but still the balance this bike has and the possibilities you can experience with it, for me, it is absolutely worth it. And I really, really like the bike for that specifically. But let's maybe get a bit more detailed. What are the things that I really enjoy when it comes to street riding? Of course, there is the fun riding in twisties, of which I hopefully will be able to insert here a couple of clips, of course. Whenever you change this bike into its dynamic mode, dynamic pro, whatever you want to call it, and you have the stiffer suspension settings with that throttle mapping, which is a bit more energetic, you have a lot of fun in twisties, at least in my opinion. This was so much fun. It is what it is. This kind of street riding is still my absolute favorite. Yeah? I can't help it. I just can't help it. I just love it. I don't think that you suffer on this bike from the telelever, from the so-called less amount of feedback that you get from it. I think this bike delivers more than sufficient feedback. I'm never afraid of any kind of corners. You can easily get this bike to 50 degrees and more lean angle to each side, even on these 50-50 tires. You can notice every little bit of sliding and maybe loss of grip or whatever, and judge and adjust your riding style accordingly. So really think they have done a good job on that part. At the same time, if you maybe had a very long day, or you're just not in that day in the mood for some twisty roads or being a bit quicker through those twisty roads, you just want to enjoy the environment you're in, the landscape, the whatever it is you want to enjoy at that moment, and you switch the bike over into its road configuration, into the road mode, the bike transforms and you are riding something so relaxed, which is never pushing you to do anything. On the contrary, I sometimes notice myself riding slower than what the speed limit permits, noticing that I'm not even close to, here in Germany it's typically 100 kilometers per hour on the road. I'm riding slower. Not because I'm afraid or whatsoever, just because this bike makes me feel so relaxed and does never push me to be the quickest on the road, and I never have the feeling like the engine is unhappy with low RPMs or whatsoever. So this is this, let's say, different soul, this different character that the bike definitely has. And then, since we are on the experiences and the feelings and the emotions that you have, if I then turn over onto a gravel road, admittedly, this is a very simple condition here, but nonetheless, I just switch over from the tarmac onto a gravel road and I feel at home. And I am someone who's very unexperienced with off-road riding, and this bike has made it very simple for me to ride off-road and to never be really intimidated. Yes, it's a heavy bike. Yeah, there's no question about it. If it falls over, it is actually quite simple and quite easy to lift. Unless you're in very challenging terrains, of course, if there's like a very steep hill or whatsoever. But come on, tell me any bike that isn't difficult to lift in that situation, right? But again, this engine, the suspension, the weight distribution of the bike, even for someone like me who has just done his first real adventure trip there through Italy, I was never afraid, or there was never a situation where I was overwhelmed with whatever was coming there or scared. This bike just took care of me and never made me feel like I don't belong in this situation. Um, at least that's my feeling, and that's how I experienced the bike. Let's go. Good. Okay, short break here. So I think to the right is the correct call. Oh, woo! Yes! Shit, but yes! Woo! Is it the enduro, hardcore, whatever bike? No, of course it isn't. It's in the configuration as I have it here, probably, if the luggage is filled, at least some 270 kilos, I guess, with luggage and so on, plus the 100 and something kilos on top of it with riding gear, uh, which is me. I mean, come on, yeah, it's never going to be a race bike, of course. But for what I have done so far with the bike, I really cannot say that there have been any major issues or problems that I faced with riding these certain conditions. Quite high up on my pro list is the technology of the bike. It is, first of all, simple to navigate, so just getting into the menu is quite simple, and then even within the settings, there is not much that can go wrong, let's say, in terms of figuring out where to find what, with, at least in my opinion, one exception. Between the assist and vehicle settings, which you have here, these two, no, I very often find that I select the wrong one if I want to change, for example, the suspension settings. I personally would expect the suspension settings to be here in vehicle settings. So, but if we go in there, there's a lot of stuff like lock with the ignition off and light settings and so on. But you will not find the suspension in there. For the suspension, you need to go into assist. And in the assist, you would then find the suspension and more specifically the damping configuration. And as you can see here, I do have the different mode sets to different values. For example, on the road mode, I am set to a very low dampening set point so that I have a very soft suspension. It's floaty, let's say. Okay, over some certain bumps in the road, it can sometimes even feel a bit too soft, let's say. Yeah, it's swinging slightly, but I don't think it's as bad as it can be on the 1250, where you sometimes feel like you're sitting on a boat, kind of. Yeah, so I think it's a bit more controlled. And then, of course, you could change that up to whatever your heart desires. In my case, I just keep it there, and I would do similar things on the dynamic and the enduro setting. What a lot of people seem to have a bit of a problem with is this hamburger button. I personally don't see much of a problem with it. I do like it, to be honest, especially since I'm not changing the function of the hamburger button that often. My main use is the windscreen. Yeah, the electric windscreen is what I use the most of the time. In winter, I would have the second function set to heating. Currently, I have it set to ACC. That's still from my trip to Italy, where especially on the motorway, I noticed that the setting I had for Germany was too much distance to the vehicle in front. And therefore, a lot of the Italian guys tend to move over into my lane, even though I would personally not do it at this situation, but they drive slightly different than Germans do, I guess. So therefore, I had the ACC setting to a closer distance to the person in front. But then again, it's not rocket science to change it and to adapt it to it. I personally never use the changing in the DTC, maybe because of my lack of experience and skills off-road, so I'm still completely relying on the traction control. And I also never changed the damping settings through it. I know on the older 1250s and so on, you could change the suspension settings through one press of a button. Um, you can still kind of do that nowadays by just changing the mode, right? And cycling through the different modes that are available. And because of that, you're also changing the suspension settings. And I have noticed that I never touch the suspension on its own. I only touch the suspension through the mode settings. So I don't need these two additional settings in there. For me, heating, ACC, and the windscreen would be more than enough. I really like the ACC system since I do have it on my car as well. And I was riding my car now for a couple of years before I bought this bike. And I tested not only the 1300, I also tested other bikes which did not have the ACC. And I didn't like those bikes, not the bikes in total, but I didn't like the cruise control on those bikes anymore because they did not have the adaptive cruise control. And maybe that's because of my use case. I usually use the cruise control in traffic, especially here in Germany. We're not allowed to filter through, also not with the motorcycle. So whenever there is traffic, I just switch on the cruise control and I just can relax a bit more. That does not mean that I do not pay attention to the traffic, of course, but I do not need to do this micro adjustment of keeping the distance to the person in front because the bike is doing it for me. And that is, in my opinion, a very nice thing. Some other positives that I have on the bike, which might not be that obvious, admittedly in my case, because I bought the Enduro package, are these additional plastic parts here and right here on the shaft drive. Plus, of course, the fact that you have these, at least in my opinion, decent foot packs where I took out the rubber elements for off-road riding. Then the adjustment of the foot lever, especially with enduro boots, it can be otherwise quite tricky to reach that foot shifter. And also, that's as far as I know. I don't know if the adjustment is because of the enduro mode. It might be. I have to check on that. But what is definitely not part of the enduro mode is this additional lever here that you have for the main stand, which I find a very good addition to the bike because it's just out of the way. You can just fold it down and then you never get in contact with it with your foot, and I find that to be a quite good addition to the bike. The same goes, by the way, for the adjustable brake lever, which you can just turn up and down, whether you're in off-road riding conditions or if you're in street riding conditions. Just a nice touch, just a nice addition to the bike that I am using quite regularly. And then maybe as one of the last pros that I have, the handguards. Maybe not the handguards directly. In the end, it probably comes down to the fact that this is a boxer engine in this motorcycle. So whenever you fall over, you're never really falling over, which means you don't necessarily need protection for the upper area here on the bike. And also, I don't really think that I need bark busters. I've fallen over a couple of times already, and the extent that the damage really goes to is a bit of a scratching here on the mirror. And that might be also, you could say, one of the downsides to having the rear radar in my case, because that means I do have these indications in the mirror. There's even a cable going to the mirror to indicate if there's somebody in my blind spot, for example. That means I cannot really exchange these mirrors. I am stuck with them. I don't think there are aftermarket mirrors for this with this function as of yet. I might be wrong. Maybe somebody can hint something at me, but that might be a downside. But even with all the riding I've done so far, this is pretty much the extent of damage that I have on them. Another thing that I see as a positive, but also as a negative, is the light. If we switch on the light, you can see we have this day running light, which I really like. I do have the auxiliary lights, which should be switched off any second again, which I keep always running at daytime. And then you do have the low beam of the bike, of course. And the combination of the low beam with these auxiliary lights, they are the best light that I have experienced on a bike so far. And I would even say they are better than my car, at least the low beam. The high beam, on the other hand, is just not good. I don't know how else to put it. It is not worthy of this bike. And the strange thing with the high beam on the bike, at least in my opinion, is that it does not provide any benefits in terms of seeing further into the distance. You could maybe argue that, well, it serves its name being a high beam, because if you would ride through a tunnel and you switch on the high beam of this bike, the ceiling of the tunnel would be lit up nicely, but you just do not gain any benefits to the front. I don't know what the adjustment is supposed to be there. In my opinion, it's not good at all. The good thing is, though, the low beam is so good that I have never felt the urge or the requirement to have a better high beam, because the low beam is good enough for my riding in the dark. And especially since I hardly ever ride in the dark. If you're somebody who rides more often in the dark without any traffic around you, different story. But the majority of riding in the dark is usually when I'm commuting in winter, for example. But here in the area I live in, there is so much traffic that you can never use the high beam to begin with. So that part is not really of interest to me, to be honest. But as said at the beginning, where there's light, there has to be darkness. That means there have to be things that I don't like. And probably my main problem with this bike, the biggest problem that I have with this bike, is the seat. This is supposedly the high comfort seat. I can easily ride the bike with this high seat. I also don't have the adaptive height control of the suspension or anything like that. Just ride around with the high seat. But realistically speaking, after an hour, I just want to get off of the seat. Two things that happen. Usually you just slide to the forward of the seat. That means you're just sitting here on the front narrow part of the seat. And even if there's some damping in it, I feel like I'm sitting on whatever there is in structure underneath the seat, under the padding, after a short time. And especially I feel like these outer parts are pressing into my rear. Some of that you can get a slight bit better by lowering the back part of the seat, because that adjustment is still there. What they've taken away, though, from the 1250 is the possibility to raise the front of the seat. And I think that's a big downside. And I would like to see that come back in future iterations of the bike. Plus, just a better seat in general. I don't know how else to put it. I really don't like it. At least for me, when I sit on the bike, I do find, with the stock seat at least, to have a lot of pressure on my knees. Maybe it's because of that sliding forward, and it constantly puts a negative pressure or an uncomfortable pressure onto my knee. It's not only that the seat is uncomfortable, but also my knees start to hurt. And after a longer riding day, I always had the issue that my knees really got into pain. I just pushed through it so far. I just ignored it, kind of. But as we will see later on, the small modification I have done has taken away the knee issue completely. Not the uncomfortable seat yet, but at least the knee issues. Another con for me personally are the brakes. Maybe not a full-on con, a full-on negative, as they are absolutely powerful and they get you to stop and you do actually have a good feeling off-road. But on-road, I very often feel like they are lacking. Maybe that is because I'm running these 50/50 tires and the ABS system and so on is just preventing the front wheel from locking up, and due to the kind of tire that I have in the front. But very often I find the brake itself to be very soft, and I can, how to put it, I usually brake with 2 fingers, and when I do so, when I really want to stop the bike, I do clamp the other 2 fingers by that, because the braking point, the actual real force in that brake comes so late, and I do have the levers adjusted, at least in my world, properly. Still, I think the actual clamping force, the full braking force, for me personally, comes way too late, and there's a lot of like nothingness in between. To make it even worse, when you apply the rear brake first, and that's due to this integral braking or this connected brake, or however the system is called in detail, is when you apply the rear brake first, the front brake all of a sudden becomes as hard as a rock. You can't even squeeze it properly, because when you apply the rear brake first, the front brake is activated as well by the rear brake. And then if you want to apply the front brake lever, you cannot move it properly, which is a very strange feeling, which I have somewhat gotten used to, or putting it the other way around. I just gotten used to always apply the front brake first before the rear brake. But in the off-road training, I learned that's not really a good idea. You should apply the rear brake first before the front brake. Okay, maybe it's a philosophy thing. Some like to do it that way. Others like to do it that way. I'm just used to now braking always with the front first before I apply the rear brake. So I'm not the biggest fan there. I think the system could be better in that regard, especially when applying the rear brake and the front becoming hard as a rock. But there's one technology part on this bike where I would like an improvement as well, and that is the tire pressure monitoring system. It works perfectly fine. Yeah, I haven't had any issues with it not working, don't get me wrong. What I would like to see though is that I could set the pressures myself. Maybe that is possible, and I'm just not aware of it, or I haven't found the option. But for off-road riding, I have reduced the pressures quite a lot, and therefore I also switched off the low pressure warning that is available from the bike. And I think that's a very important feature that I'm taking away from myself by that, because otherwise every time I switch on the bike, I always have the warning, oh, tire pressure is low, stop riding the bike, pull over to the side of the road, whatever, check the pressures. And you would have that warning every time, again and again and again, popping up when you start up the bike. So I would really like to see a adjustment possibility for the set points. So what are the problems that I faced on the bike? Nothing major. What does that mean? I had one incident where the front collision warning told me it's not working anymore. The thing is that the front collision warning works based on the radar, and the radar is switched off in enduro mode. And this warning only occurred when I was in the enduro mode. So if there was like an internal issue with the software whatsoever, that it I don't know, forgot that it is not switched on in enduro mode or whatever, I don't know. I have a picture of that, sadly only in German, because back at that time I was not even considering to do any YouTube videos. I just took a picture of it in case it reoccurred, so I could show it potentially to the workshop. The second problem that I ran into was when I installed the tank ring, which is holding the SW Motec tank bag in position. Therefore, you need to remove some of the original parts, replace some of the bolts, and reinstall everything. And here on the tank, you do have, on the opening lid for the tank, you do have some contacts. And I guess because I opened everything and there was some issue with these contacts afterwards, when I switched on the bike, the complete gauge cluster, more specifically the RPM gauge, was red. And I couldn't start the bike anymore. So what I did, I switched off the bike, I removed the seat, I disconnected the battery, waited for a couple of seconds, reconnected the battery, and afterwards the problem was gone. So I guess there was just some issue with those contacts causing any kind of hiccup. Nothing that stopped me from doing anything. It was just a quick disconnect the battery and that's it. And yeah, that's it. That's all the problems I really faced. So I know there are people out there who apparently have had more problems than I have had. But since I didn't have them, I can't report on them. And I can only say this bike has been nothing but reliable so far. And then as the last part of the video, as promised, a couple of the modifications that I have on the bike. And I would like to start up here in the cockpit with this phone mount that I have. It's a mix of SP Connect and Wunderlich. And Wunderlich just 3D prints this adapter, which slots in nicely into the original mounting for the navigation system on BMW systems. So you just, and I can even do it here with one hand, clips in. And it comes with these additional USB ports here on the side, and it has the vibration mount of SP Connect so that the phone camera doesn't get damaged from installing it here on the bike. And then you just lock it down like you would with the regular navigation system, and that's it. So in my case, what I need to do is when I install the phone up front here, then I would need to connect a cable through the main charging port of the phone and then connect it to that 3D printed part from Wunderlich. Then I don't really know if you would call it a modification, but what I have done is I have removed the bar risers, the original ones that come with the bike, and I only moved up the handlebars slightly. I rotated them slightly upwards, but I didn't like having the original bar risers on the bike because I don't know how else to describe it. I always felt like I was riding like a chopper style bike with very high handlebars. You probably all know them, these custom bikes. And I never really got any feeling for the front tire, and actually felt like in low speed maneuvers the bike was very nervous and I didn't have any control over it. So I removed these, and when I have the bars tilted down into neutral position, that's where I think the bike is the best handling wise on the street. But since I want to have a good mix between the street and the off-road riding, I tilted the handlebars slightly up forward. That compromises a bit on the street riding, but benefits me in off-road riding. And I do have the SW Motec tank bag. I'm quite happy with it. It's the waterproof version where you have this top lid and another one underneath. So I haven't had any issues with water coming in whatsoever. So perfectly fine for me in that regard. And since we are up here, you may see it or you may not see it. I hope it comes across. You can maybe see that this is a shiny surface here, and the rest of course as well. That's because I have a protective wrap on the bike from Wunderlich, which is not that expensive. And I feel like it was a good investment, especially if you come over with me, and this is really the major damage that I have on my bike. This, can you see it maybe a little better? Yeah, there. So what happened to me during the off-road training is that I toppled over in a very strange incident, and I actually managed to get this part in contact with the ground. And without the protective film here, without the protective wrap, I would have damaged the actual paint of the bike, which I did a little bit right there. But besides that, the majority of the fender here is not really damaged. It looks very bad, but it's really just the wrap. The actual paint and everything underneath is in perfect condition. So that was definitely an investment worth it, at least in my book. Staying at the front of the bike, I do have the Sump guard from SW Motec with the extension piece here on the top. And I don't know if it comes across, but this part here is quite bent because of an impact from a stone. If we go over to the other side of the bike, you might be able to see that this is quite a bit further away from the engine. So having the extension was definitely the correct choice, so that the stone which came up in that case, I guess, didn't impact the engine casing itself. From here, of course, we can continue to the crash bars. I do have the original crash bars on the engine, but I did exchange this plate on the side, the cylinder head cover protection, the original one, and exchanged it with these ones from Wunderlich, which, make no mistake, I still managed to bend. Especially the center part here is not as stiff, but something has to move. Yeah, of course they could make this stiffer. The problem though is then if this one does not move, then what moves needs to be the crash bars, and if they don't move, the attachment of the crash bars to the engine frame or to the engine itself and also to the frame of the bike would need to take that impact and potentially get damaged from it. So I think it is still a good idea to have these. Additionally, I do have the reinforcements bars here. In this case, they are from Touratech. I found them relatively easy to install, and I think they are a good addition as well, just to prevent this part to ever bend towards the cylinder head itself. Coming to the rear of the bike, I do have the Touratech mountings for cases and soft luggage and what else. Managed to bend them as well during the off-road training when I had this strange incident there, which made me having to rebend it a bit so that the luggage system could fit again. And the luggage system I have are these EMD adventure gear bags. They are soft bags, but they come with a decent backplate. So this is a metal backplate. Though the metal backplate does not, or the screws, they do not screw into the waterproof part of these bags, which is a big plus in my opinion. That means it doesn't interfere with the waterproof conditions of these bags. Then it has a quite decent locking mechanism, I feel like. Relatively simple to install on the bike with the key. You do need a different key though. It's not really possible to do it with the original bike's key or anything like that, so you would always need to carry the additional key. And what I also like about these is that they have these, maybe here from this side, these fit lock function. That means if you just open them like this, they are very easy to open, and because they're magnetic, they also slot back in quite easily. So another modification I have is the increased side stand foot from SW Motec in this case. I would say if you are not riding off-road on a regular basis in very soft terrain, you do not really need it. I think the size of the original foot is quite nice. I have been able to get away with it for almost 1 year. I only have it installed, or had it installed recently before the ACT tour. So I never struggled with that original foot size, but I thought now for more off-road focused riding, it might be a good idea. And then last but not least, I changed something about the seat as mentioned. So these 4 rubber elements, and the ones here in the front, they are changed. So these are a little bit changed in dimension. And the front ones, they are, as you can see here, the rubber, the bore on the center for this rod is not in the center, but it's eccentric. This provides the benefit that the front part of the seat is raised up. So this way I reduce the problem, or get somewhat rid of the problem that the front of the seat is too low and that you're sliding towards the front of the bike, towards the front of the seat constantly, and only sit on the front part of the seat. I have to admit though, it does not solve the problem completely. Yes, it made the seat much more comfortable, but I am still not 100% convinced with this one, or that's a very nice way of putting it. When I came back from Italy, or when I went to Italy, on both occasions I rode around 700 kilometers in one go, in one day. And definitely after like 2 hours on the highway, for example, freeway or motorway or autobahn or whatever you want to call it, you want to latest get off of the seat still. Yeah, eventually I probably need to get my hands on some kind of customized seat to get the problem solved. For the moment, I'm still running it, obviously, but in the future, I guess I will have to change it. All right, guys, that wraps up my review of the 1300 GS after 1 year, of course. So I would consider the engine to be run in now properly. Let's see how many more kilometers I'm able to add to the bike in the foreseeable future. I have quite some tours planned. Let's see how many of those I can actually do, and how many kilometers I will collect in next year. If you enjoyed the video and you got something out of it, positive, negative, whatsoever, then feel free to leave a thumbs up, a comment, especially if you have any experience on your own with BMW, maybe in general, with this bike in specific, or if you're considering to buy the bike. And that would be the best actually if you would consider even to subscribe, especially considering that there will be some hopefully very interesting videos coming up now with me riding the ACT in Italy. So if you're interested in that, and if you're interested in seeing this heavy girl being pushed a little bit off-road, at least what I would consider pushing, then stay tuned to the channel. Bye bye.